Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you all to our panel discussion today. We have an exciting conversation beyond automation, agentic AI, and the future of payer operations. We'll begin with some introductions and set the stage as well for this conversation. It'll be an interactive conversation. We hopefully will be able to engage the audience as well as we go through the conversation. My name is Jason Grau. I'll be your moderator today. I lead growth strategy for the payer market at Innovacer. I am a former health plan executive. I've worked in numerous roles in strategy, operations, and technology serving payers for more than 25 years. And joined today by a very distinguished panel and excited to have them with us. Dr. Anil Jain, Chief Innovation Officer at Innovacer, Brian Cardinal, who's the Global Head of Payer Strategy at AWS, and Christy Reyes, who is the Director of Risk Adjustment Coding Operations at UST HealthProof. I'd like to invite each of our panelists to introduce themselves briefly, beginning with Anil, and take 1 to 2 minutes to share a little bit about your background, and then we'll set the context then for today's conversation and drive a exciting and very timely topic for today's discussion. So Anil, over to you.
Well, thank you, Jason. So as Jason mentioned, I'm Anil Jain. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Innovacer and been here about 4 years. And previous to this, I was at IBM Watson Health as a Chief Health Information Officer. Came to IBM through an acquisition of a company I co-founded called Explorus, which was a data and analytics company that I had spun out of the Cleveland Clinic, where I was a IT executive and a clinician, as well as a clinical informaticist. And I hope in this conversation, we talk a little bit about how we are in an inflection point. We know that automation is alive and well with payers, and I will bring some of that experience and expertise over the years around how we're thinking about AI and really represent the voice of Innovacer, but really broadly sort of giving you the good, the bad, and the ugly of what's happening out there. And I'm excited to be having this conversation with my wonderful colleagues.
Brian.
Hey everybody, Brian Cardinal here in San Diego. It's great to be part of this discussion. No better time than now to be part of a very important industry in need of our help. And I think I have the best job in the company. I get to lead our strategy, our payer strategy here at AWS. And in so doing, it's almost an embarrassment of riches in terms of opportunity to learn. I get to work with our largest customers nationally, our partners internationally, and also spend some time with our private equity and venture capital investors who are looking at areas of opportunity to invest. And it's great to be part of this call. I've been in the industry now for about 20 years, operational roles at Cigna, Great West, United, sales roles at Microsoft. And again, I've been here for about 14 months. So it's great to be part of the conversation, and hopefully this is useful and looking forward to it. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Christy, finally.
Hi. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christy Reyes. I am the Director of Risk Adjustment Coding Operations at UST HealthProof. I have been in my role here over 10 years as we've navigated name changes from DDDS to Tessellate to Advantasure to now UST HealthProof. So my organization oversees all things medical coding and compliance, including retro, prospective, concurrent clinical documentation improvement, risk mitigation, RADV, HRADV. I am a coder. I'm a certified coder as well. And I've been in healthcare all my adult life. Prior to accepting this role, I worked for the CMS RAC, specializing in fraud and abuse. So compliance is near and dear to my heart. Really excited to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Anil, Brian, and Christy. Want to give an overview of how today's session will flow. We're going to explore 4 major themes around agentic AI, excuse me, in the payer operations. First, we'll talk about opportunities and really where to start. Next is thinking about responsible adoption and what are the guardrails that are critical and that need to be understood and respected as payers dive into the AI space. Third, we'll cover barriers and challenges and really identify what are some of the things that might be standing in the way, and maybe things that are around the corner, over the hills that people need to be aware of as they're endeavoring on their AI journey. And then finally, we'll close out thinking about competitive advantage and what will separate the leaders from the laggards in this space. We hope to make this, like I said, an interactive session, not only with our panelists, but we do have a Q&A capability as well. You can submit questions, and then we'll address questions at the close of the session, and be able to address some of those questions that you submit into us, as well as follow up if need be. We'll spend about 45 minutes in the panel discussion and then open it up um, for that conversation at the end. Before we jump into it, and really before we dive into the major themes, want to set the context for why we're here. So I want to take a step back and really understand why this conversation right now, why is this changing? Why is this so timely? Why is there so much interest in this? And sharing a personal anecdote, my own personal experience, as recently as 2 years ago, working in the payer space, the idea of using AI in healthcare was almost taboo. Many payer executives would tell me that healthcare is different, and AI would play out only in a limited role for the foreseeable future. Fast forward to today, and that landscape has shifted dramatically. Over just the past year, almost every health plan that I talk to is actively exploring how AI can reshape operations, how it can reshape member engagement and outcomes. And I think the art of the possible has really been opened up. And so just in that short amount of time, the mindset and the mentality seems to have shifted. So I'd like to ask our panelists and really kind of as we approach this panel, what have you observed in this shift, and why is it that you think that the resistance to AI might be dissipating, and why there's the energy that we're seeing in the marketplace right now? Neil, I'll point to you maybe to start off with your point of view and perspective on this, but would love to hear Brian and Christy's perspectives as well.
Yeah, look, as I mentioned earlier, Jason, I mean, we are at a turning point where I think most of our audience recognizes that's why they're joining us today, that automation alone is insufficient for the challenges in front of us. And payers, I think, are looking at all this transformation happening with AI, not just in other industries, but in other parts of the health ecosystem. And they're really interested in AI systems that can learn, that can reason, and that can be safely acting upon an environment in which there are some guardrails. And I think, they're not just focused on cost reduction. Obviously, cost reduction is a key component of it, but it's really around being able to respond with smarter systems, having a more trusted set of systems, not just for all the things that we hear about in the press, but really, really thinking through what is the transformation of how they've done business in the past. And I think they also are looking at member satisfaction and really trying to figure out what role does AI play in helping improve member outcomes, member satisfaction, as well as provider outcomes and provider satisfaction, and really trying to grow that relationship they've had with providers. I think the key parts that sort of challenge folks to get started, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in detail, is what are those guardrails? What do those guardrails look like? And are those guardrails incredibly narrow, or are they fairly wide? And how can they start perhaps with some narrower guardrails and then mature over time? I think part of the challenge, and I hope that Brian, Christy, and I are able to help illustrate some of this, is that one can be able to start in a safe, secure manner across a wide variety of use cases that we'll get into in a little bit.
Brian, any thoughts on what you're observing in the marketplace, and if my experience is consistent with yours in terms of the momentum?
Yeah, that is plus one to Anil and Jason to you as well. I'd say my mental model and our mental model here is with respect to payers is I like to think about it in terms of um, what's happening on the government sponsored side of the equation and the extent to which that has changed and likely will change over time. There are there's a dynamic energy, dynamic tension there that has existed, but has also moved our industry forward in many ways. And so many of the AI and technologies that we're using are in response to those issues that the government sponsored plans are facing. On the other side of the equation, we have this whole idea of serving members that are employer sponsored. And it turns out that over 150 million lives in America are paid, or their insurance is covered by their employer. And so, to the extent that that side of the equation hasn't been impacted as much about policy, I would say we're seeing more of a forward-leaning approach with respect to AI and technology to lower costs on behalf of the employers who employ who pay for their members' insurance. And so I'd say that that side of the equation has been more hasn't been affected as much. In fact, AI has accelerated in that case. On the government side, we're now seeing this sort of a plateau effect where we've seen the changes. We appreciate what's happening with respect to the pledge. We appreciate what's happening with respect to prior authorization. And as a result, we're seeing more artificial intelligence being imputed into those circumstances. And so I'd say we're at a point now here in September of 2025 where we're really looking at the extent to which we can not just react to the changes coming from Capitol Hill, but accelerate through the turn and help our customers compete despite those changes. And so whether it's risk adjustment oriented or digital front door or health and wellness, I'd say a huge opportunity on the government side and a continued acceleration on the employer sponsor side of the equation.
Christy, finally, to close it out, your perspectives on maybe some of the momentum changes that you've experienced it, and you're certainly living it, I guess, on the front lines. But what are your observations in terms of the momentum towards adopting AI responsibly?
Yeah, I think we've all attended conferences lately where it's basically been AI palooza, right? It was an onslaught of everything AI. And look, it's scary. I think early concerns, particularly in my area of work, were surrounding compliance, right? Trusting a machine to do what a human does is tricky. And I think there was also the component of fear in the industry where, well, are these going to replace me, right? Which both of those are valid concerns. But what we're seeing is as these AIs turn to machine learning, right? We're seeing better and better and more compliant results. But what we've got to remember too is that the teamwork between the AI, these machine learning systems, and humans is really important to continually refine those accurate results, right? So and especially as regulations change, we know like we start doing stuff right and the government changes the rules on us, right? That's their job. So as those regulations are changing, the AI has to adapt and change with them, and they have to do it quickly. So if we think about some of the major changes in the MA space, right? Implementation of the CMS HCC model V28 that went into effect for 2025 dates of service. So if your teams do concurrent coding, prospective coding, they're already working with those. And because of V28 and the changes that were made, we're expecting a reduction in RAF there. I mean, CMS has said you're going to see a reduction in RAF. So I think part of the turnaround is, okay, we know we're going to have an impact here. How can we use AI to mitigate that impact while ensuring that we're capturing the full and accurate burden of illness of these members, right? So I think really how the attitude around this has changed is along the lines of risk mitigation. How can we use this together with humans to make sure that we're getting the most compliant and accurate results to the full extent that we can?
Those are
Chrissy,
great
I'll add back to
perspectives.
that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just I didn't so around predictive analytics, like AI as a means to predict the risk associated with membership mix is hugely important as we look to you know move toward whatever happens next. So I want to mention that.
Yeah, that's great perspective, and I think it again highlights the how quickly the conversation in AI has been shifting, and kind of the themes that's moving along. Uh, Want to use that then to segue over to our kind of first major theme in our conversation today, which is really around the opportunities, and want to explore where payers can start and which areas have the most immediate impact. And this is our first audience participation opportunity. We're going to share a poll and get your perspectives. So if we could pull up the survey and get some audience participation on this, that would be fantastic. So as the poll results are coming in, I actually want to share a quick anecdote and quick story from my own uh, experience. About a decade ago, I spent a lot of time working um, in the member experience and clinical engagement space, and observing call centers was just eye-popping for me. It often took 8 to 12 weeks of training just to onboard new agents. Once you got onto the floor, they had to navigate multiple systems in real time. They had to dig through PDFs and knowledge bases and document the conversation, all doing that while speaking with members in real time. And with the average agent staying about 6 to 9 months, organizations were constantly on this hamster wheel of constant cycles of hiring and retraining and trying to get people that could follow these complicated scripts and document everything. And that was, just screamed out that there needed to be a better way. And today we're obviously seeing AI in that space, for better or worse in some situations. But I think in terms of recognizing that was a massive problem to solve, there's energy there and seeing some potential there. But why don't we go ahead and close the poll so that we can see the results. But would like to start with you, Brian, in terms of first, what are your reactions to the audience poll? Anything
Mm-hmm.
that's maybe surprising in terms of what's jumping out, or there's I
Yeah.
think a spread across
Y-
areas, and
Yeah. I
shockingly
don't know if the
member
poll is officially.
engagement.
I know. I see zeros across the board on that, interestingly
Yeah.
and ironically, because what you just said is spot on. Like what you just said relative to member engagement, um, not just engaging with members using call center or contact center technology, but also with providers, and to the extent that that contact center environment, depending on how it's built and constructed, it can have it can be positive for those who work there or very negative. So you've got this idea at the employer level where they're facing how do we keep the right people in those contact centers to work with members in the moments that matter. So I find it interesting that that wasn't shared. I'd say um, market growth, like the rest of those make sense. So claims automation resonates. Risk adjustment quality for sure. Christy will appreciate that. Utilization management, absolutely. Data integration infrastructure, and then growth, I think, is interesting that it only represented 7% of the responses. And the reason I say that is because we spend a lot of time on advising our customers on thinking about new lines of business, new ways of doing business. Again, going back to this idea of government sponsored versus employer, what's the right mix there? And then within government sponsored, is there the right strategy with respect to Medicaid and Medicare Advantage? What are the advantages of Medicare Advantage? And so I'm surprised that only 7% or one person said market growth, because that's an area where many of our health plan customers are finding analytics and the use of artificial intelligence and other means to help them guide their future and predict what might happen if they make a move in this way or that way actuarially, and then just from a general market perspective. So Otherwise, the rest of this sets up. Not surprised, claims automation is slightly ahead of risk adjustment because of the energy associated with getting better about paying claims. We've had to do that for now 20 years, 25 years, and it's finally coming to the point where it's something it's not a nice to do anymore. So that's my reaction. Hopefully that's useful.
Yeah, no, that's great perspective. And you brought up a couple of things that I think are maybe worth exploring a little bit more, and maybe others have a point of view on this as well, which is maybe differences across lines of business. And it looks very
Mm-hmm.
different when you maybe think about commercial versus government lines of business, or some of the nuances within government lines of business. Do we see distinctions of moving faster or slower, dependent upon the lines of business?
Yeah, yes, I would say just to extend on my opening comments, I would say that on the government side of the equation, um, and the risks associated, frankly, of getting it wrong, we have to get those things right. But now that we have a better feel for um, the expectations, I'll say, on the government side and the opportunities, we're seeing an acceleration of adoption with AI, whereas before it was this sort of wait and see. Um, and I don't know that our clients can continue to wait and see. We need to move more quickly on behalf of our members and patients and loved ones. So, um, an acceleration on the government side, a continued move toward innovating on behalf of employers, and we're also seeing this idea of are there alternative payment models, and are there new health plans coming up that are disrupting the industry from an alternative payment standpoint, and the use of analytics to chart the course for those organizations is key. And then just as recently as yesterday in New York, I had a chance to meet with several investors and some early stage startups, and turns out that I may not be totally wrong in that there's some opportunity to disrupt, and the use of AI is a good way to help with that. But a human also always has to be in the loop, to Christie's
Yeah.
point earlier. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great segue. I think maybe thinking about the moving to the next topic. I do want to close out though, because I think this part is really interesting, and I think there's maybe a couple of different ways in which you can think about AI applications and where to start. There's the overlay AI and technology on top of existing workflows, and I think about that, and this is just a crude simplification, but doing it the same way, but more efficiently and faster and better and effectively and consistently. And then the other area is fundamentally unlocking different ways of doing things when you've got the technology and the capability and the intelligence and insights to be able to do that. Um,
So,
so
so Jason, before we move to the next topic, could I just add something
yeah,
on this
please do.
particular one? Yeah, I think it's really important. I think the second part of the question is incredibly important, is how should leaders decide where to begin their journey? And I think when you think about prioritizing different use cases, taking everything that Brian just mentioned and what Christy was mentioning earlier, I think it's really important for leaders to understand that you need very high quality data for AI use cases. So start in many cases where you have good high quality data available. And then think about the ROI that you want to measure in terms of the impact on that ROI. And then think about the time frame that you have to do that in. So when you think about how you want to prioritize where to begin the journey, think about what predicate things that you have in place before you do that. And then you start thinking about the high value use cases. But the most important thing, I think, in terms of where to start is to go beyond the task automation and really think about the automation of decision making, or at least the semi human in the loop way of making decisions, because that's where the next frontier is. It's not about replacing low value work, which we already do in the payer space. It's quite common. It's really around the decision making augmentation that needs to now happen with AI. And what are those use cases, which I hope we can talk about down the road.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think the decision making piece as well is, and just to expand on that, and would love additional comments on this, is that it's not just a single party decision-making process. It's typically multiple parties, multiple stakeholders that are involved, navigating across very complicated rules. If you think about healthcare as the most complicated rules engine that you can imagine, with a bunch of different stakeholders, with a lot of different information, and a lot of different evidence that's in play. I think that navigating the decision is especially complicated, but also aided by the ability to be able to coordinate across those stakeholders as well.
Hey,
Yeah, and in some
Jason,
cases, I would say that
oh,
the
go ahead,
decision,
Anil. Yes, yes.
I'm sorry, the decision making may not be complicated, but it's cumbersome. And those
Yes,
cumbersome
that's probably a better
opportunities
term.
are perfect opportunities for AI. No one is trying to take clinical reasoning away from clinicians. No one is trying to automatically deny services. But in those cases where 85, 95% of, for example, procedures are automatically approved or are approved eventually, can we do things to help reduce some of that burden? That's how Innovator is thinking about it, is not replacing people, but those low value work in which there's incredible amounts of cumbersome. Can we reduce some of that? Because ultimately those things will be happening, and they just require a lot of busy work, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Brian,
Neil,
you had a
to your
comment?
point, like the extension of being disciplined, the notion of being disciplined about the things you want to build with respect to artificial intelligence, and those that you feel like are of lesser consequence, where you want to farm out, and this notion of really getting sort of ruthlessly prioritizing which ones to focus on, where to invest, is what we're seeing out there as well across the board. So
Thank you. Yeah, well, just segueing to the next conversation. There's the opportunity and the promise, and I think we've touched on this a couple of different ways. But with the opportunity comes a lot of responsibility, and in healthcare, trust and compliance are non-negotiable. So as we move forward, the question isn't just where to start, but how to start. And starting with the data is a critical piece, as you mentioned. But how do we ensure that adoption is safe, secure, responsible, sustainable? So again, we're going to open up another survey question as we move into this theme. But as we think about responsible adoption and what guardrails need to be in place, um, what are the things that are most critical? And again, uh, poll question for the audience that we can kick things off. And I know that this, Christy, is an area particularly for you that is near and dear to your heart, or certainly critical in terms of thinking about the importance of it. Um, so as the poll results are coming in, I'll maybe toss it over to you to kick us off here in thinking about the responsible adoption and guardrails and some of the concerns that you have.
Absolutely. I always joke that sometimes I'm Debbie Downer because we'll have all these great ideas and I'm like, oh, we need to think about compliance. So essentially talking about, how you begin the journey, making sure that you're getting what you need. So prior to using any AI solution, I know this is basic stuff, guys, but I've seen it all, trust me. You have to complete a pilot, right? Any reputable, if you're looking to outsource this, any reputable AI company would be willing to do a pilot with you for little or no cost, right? Do not trust a demo environment. And I say that again, I've seen it all. So you can't trust a demo environment without running a pilot. So I'm going to use NLP, or natural language processing, because UST Health Proof uses this. We have an NLP platform. We just acquired an NLP vendor as well. So you have to make sure that when you're testing your NLP, you got to test for accuracy and also efficiency, right? And again, I know this is basic stuff, but I feel the need to say it for a reason. Prior to implementation, test. Once you go live, test, engage and collaborate interdepartmentally, and business ops and executives. You need evaluation from all areas of your organization, technology to engineering to coding to compliance. These are things that again, you would think would be basic, but we see a lot, even in my consulting, where these things aren't being done, right? Because something works for technology, you're like, oh, this is great. By the time you go and implement it, and it gets down to the coding, suddenly your production has plummeted, right? Or you're not seeing the gains that you were expecting to see. So make sure you get buy-in from all areas of your organization. And also after you've implemented, it passed go, we're collecting $200, let's go. Continue to audit your NLP or your AI solution, right? Gain feedback from the folks that are actually using these solutions in their day-to-day. Ensure also that you understand how the AI engine works. Is it machine learning? Which, if it's NLP, it really should be. How quickly is it updated for regulatory changes? How efficient is it? That's great if it's accurate and complete, but how efficient is it? Is it bringing up a lot of insights or things that you don't need and you have to remove, and it's time consuming, right? Um, is it allowing you to do more with less? And to be very clear, because I am a coder here, my stance, UST Health Proof stance, is that we do not recommend that any kind of AI NLP to be used alone when it comes to medical coding. This is a compliance issue. Again, I've seen it all. We do need humans in there to be able to provide that feedback for the machine learning, right? We need those humans, but working together, any program that you're using should make things more efficient, and more accurate and complete, right?
That's great. I'm curious, to what extent do you get the feedback from the people on the front line to be able to recognize where there may be some issues or surfacing some of those concerns? Are you getting really good and effective feedback from your teams and that are using this?
Yeah, we're very hands-on. I will say my coding leadership team, we've been working together about 10 years. So we have really great communication. The coders as well, we've got a team of really tenured employees, so they feel very comfortable providing that continuous feedback. And even if it's not like an error or a bug, forgive me, I'm not a tech person. Maybe it's an enhancement. We make sure that we take all of those into consideration. We again get buy-in from all areas of the org before we implement those. But I think checking in with your teams is really important. Business ops execs might have a great idea and yeah, it's saving money. And it's like, okay, but also, is it saving money? Is it compliant and is it efficient? Because the money is not going to be saved if the solution is time consuming, right? Then you've got to bring on more FTEs to get the work done. So you've really got to get that buy-in, that continuous feedback from your folks that have their boots on the ground.
That's great input. And it's great to see the kind of the balance between recognizing doing it the right way and making sure that there's impact and business value as well. And I know that Anil, this is something that you're very passionate about as well, making sure that there's effective deployment and responsible deployment. Wonder how you think about the balance between security and compliance and responsibility versus delivering on the opportunities.
Yeah. So first thing I'll say, Jason, is that responsible AI starts not at deployment, but at building the products. And so, for example, at Innovacer, I co-chair, along with our chief legal counsel, our AI governance committee. And I would recommend everyone who's listening to us look at their organization and take what Christy just said and put some structure around it. What would that structure look like? That structure would be an AI governance committee of some form. It could be a small committee, it could be a big committee, but it needs to be multidisciplinary or cross-functional. Having people involved from compliance, just as Christy was mentioning, having folks involved from the clinical side of the fence, the data sciences in terms of who's who in the zoo when it comes to data. And I always say, I've probably have heard me say this if you listen to my talks, there is no AI policy without a data policy. There's no AI governance without data governance. So really focusing on having a cross-functional team and then making sure that you're emphasizing those points within this governance committee. Transparency is key. The ability to understand You cannot mitigate bias if you don't measure bias. Doesn't mean that there is no bias at all. Every system has bias, but do you understand it well enough to understand how to mitigate the risks of it? And making sure that we understand how that information is going to be made available through regular audits so that we can understand that we're moving towards improving our systems over time. There is no perfect system, and they should be improved over time. And then the final one, and Christy alluded to it, is that there are going to be some functions in which we need to be incredibly adamant that there's a human in the loop. Absolutely adamant. But there are other low value functions in which it's perfectly fine. And we would all agree at a governance level that automation, complete automation is okay because it's either low risk or there's enough guardrails around it that we all feel comfortable with it. So that's part of the responsibilities of a governance committee or a governance process. You cannot have responsible AI without having a structure in place to measure, monitor, and improve upon it. And I'll just say one last thing, that in healthcare in general, and not just saying this because I'm a clinician, that trust is the currency at which adoption and scale grows. If there is no trust in the system, you're not going to get adoption and scale. So it really does start with some form of responsibility.
Great, thank you, Brian. I think you had additional comments to add before we move to the
Yeah.
next theme.
Yeah, Anil, I love what you just said. I mean, that's one of the leadership principles we follow here at Amazon is the idea of building trust. And it's in this case, it couldn't be a more important currency. And I like that term too. I try to use that. It is the currency that we trade on every day. And so great points. What we're also seeing, Jason and team, is this idea of the Office of Artificial Intelligence. Now that we've moved from like, hey, AI is a potential has potential uses. Now it's this: how do we really organize around what's most important? And this idea of the Office of Artificial Intelligence is coming up, which is essentially, Christy, a government governing body, but at the executive levels. To Neil's point, sitting at the top of the house, having these discussions to the extent that AI can be deployed uh, anywhere around the C-suite. So more of a testament to how serious this is and how much opportunity we have to do it right.
Of course, even when organizations are committed to doing this the right way, it's rarely easy. The reality is that many payers face real obstacles when it comes to adopting AI at scale, from the data quality and cost to workforce skills to cultural resistance and regulatory issues. So as we segue to the next theme and explore this further. Want to think about and understand what are the barriers and challenges that organizations are facing. And as we start to move beyond that, and again, another audience participation opportunity to understand what you're seeing within your own organization. So if we could pop the survey up, we can get your perspectives. Again, we're limiting you to a single choice on these, which I know, and we didn't talk too much about the results on the previous survey, but I know in a lot of cases there's no one right answer here. So I'm curious to see how the results here emerge. Um, and here again, I think I've seen a lot of different over the past couple of decades. I've seen it in different contexts as I've worked with payers and worked in roles that were focused on transformation along a number of different dimensions, whether it was around uh, the ACA and healthcare reform back driven off of Obamacare, or as we moved into movement into value-based care models and greater virtual care integrated models, that we see a number of different dimensions of transformation and a lot of reluctance, I guess, for various reasons among payers to be able to make various jumps. A lot of inertia that's carried within payer organizations. One of the things that I think I learned early on painfully was really around kind of the cultural resistance to change. So again, if I selected one on here that's maybe a little bit outside of the box, I selected that one as something that is certainly a big barrier and a big change that we're seeing um, for organizations to be able to deal with. So as we look at the results here, and I'll kind of open it up to the panelists here to weigh in, we see answers across the board again. And surprisingly, regulatory and compliance are not the ones that got any answers. So I think it speaks to the point that there are a wide range of issues that the payers face as we're looking at it, adoption and acceptance of AI. But would open it up to the panel on their observations and reactions of what they've seen as far as biggest challenges, and if there's anything maybe within the poll results that they'd like to comment on as well. And maybe just to point at somebody, Christy, I'll point at you to start off. You're very much
All
on
right.
the front, and then I'll pass it over to other panelists as we talk about barriers.
Sure. Sure. So I think, again, I'm not a technical person. I am a coder at heart. So coding and compliance is kind of where my perspective comes from. But I think one of the biggest things is really that cross-functional communication between teams, right? I may feel really passionately like this is the best solution. It makes sense. I'm 100% in. But then it goes to technology and they're like, wait, we didn't think about A, B, and C. It's like you've really got to be open to hearing some of the barriers that other teams have before you implement something, even if you feel really passionate about it. And that goes for business ops, as well. And execs, it's like, are you listening to your folks, making sure that, every single box is checked off before that product goes live. And I think to touch on the cultural, right? I talked about this a little bit earlier is, in the coding world, we've got certified medical coders. There's a lot of talk, and I'm sure a lot of the data and tech folks on here can relate. Is this going to replace my job? Am I going to, become obsolete? Is my role, my skill set? Where we're at right now, we need you guys, right? I've seen some crazy stuff with AI, and AI gets better because it learns from humans. So I think kind of reiterating that to your teams that, hey, we've got this, we're working smarter, but we still need the input from the humans. It's not like, oh, AI gets it and that's it. Remember, there's regulatory changes, model changes, all kinds of stuff that happen, that will need to provide that feedback for these systems. So just reminding, I think, your teams and providing that level of transparency is really important.
Yeah, I think Jason, that's a great point that Christy's making. What I would just say is that, look, when we look across our prospects and customer base, and when I look across the industry in general, whether it's in the provider side or the payer side, there's rarely a single issue that's of the barrier that's causing all the challenges. It's often a combination of multiple issues. And what I would say is that being very tactical from a data point of view, you saw that on the survey among our audience, having a data platform that leverages common best practices is key. On the cultural side, I think Christy hit it on the head earlier. Um, you don't start with trying to fully automate something. You focus on how to make the human in the loop much more efficient at what they do, and culturally let society catch up, or the other way around, let payers catch up to where society might take them. But it's a bit jarring if you want to jump right into all the things that could be done. The question is, should they be done? And on the financial side, this is one where we run into all the time. ROI needs to be something that we start measuring from the beginning. And then figuring out, what do you want to do organically? What do you want to do inorganically, either through partnerships or by bringing in advisors and consultants to help augment the broader teams. But the good news is, at least the barriers that we see out there and the challenges we see out there are all can all be overcome with a good mix of discipline and the appropriate partnerships and advisors.
Yeah, no, the culture, I like this industry is as much of a math problem as it is a cultural one, and the cultural dynamics cannot be underappreciated, especially given that we have this new machine that's involved in our decision making. So the culture of the company, the culture of the organization, the vision, the people, never been more important, almost ironically, in this state that we're in of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
think oftentimes we think people process technology in a lot of respects, and I think within the people piece, they think about the bodies and the competencies, and do I have people in role, but sometimes neglect the cultural elements and the
Absolutely.
resistance to change elements as well. As we move into the final theme here and start to close things out, I want to prompt the audience again. If you have any questions, to please feel free to submit those into the Q&A box on the chat. If we have questions coming in, we'll address those here in real time, but please submit those. And then moving into the final piece and really wrapping this up as we think about the opportunities and how to really leverage this for payers is around competitive advantage. So what is it that we think is going to separate the pairs that achieve sustainable competitive advantage? And I think there's a snap reaction among a number of people that AI and technology-driven solutions inherently tip the balance of the scales towards the large mega organizations that have deep pockets publicly, in the public markets, et cetera, and the access to capital. But I wonder if that's true here, if that's one dimension that is going to be a source of competitive advantage, or if in fact, like this actually levels the playing field in some respects, that agility comes into play, and that actually the cost of a number of these capabilities deployed responsibly and thoughtfully again can be done in a cost-effective way. That's just one thought on my side in terms of where the balance may be from competitive advantage. But would love to get the panelists' thoughts. And Brian, I think you see this across a pretty broad perspective. Would be curious to kind of see if you've experienced where you maybe see opportunities of pairs of different sorts and flavors that are capitalizing and being able to pursue competitive advantage, and additional thoughts that you may have there, and then we'll open it up to the panel.
Yeah, I'll just say that this idea of really being intentional about our strategy is key, and not and taking now that we have the tools, turns out, to be thoughtful about the future of our companies, take the time to use those tools to be sure that whatever direction you head, that you're convicted in that. On the other hand, um, as long as it doesn't break any rules, don't be afraid to fail. Like, don't be afraid to ring fence a part of your business in an area where you feel like there may be opportunity, and go try it. And we tend to make a lot of mistakes here at, we're very successful at Amazon, AWS. We've also made a lot of mistakes, and that's how we that's how we learn. And I know it's cliche, but it's true. And so, I would encourage the customers on the call and others to like think about an area that is potentially interesting, and incubate that concept, do it quickly, use technology where appropriate, and then once you found that right avenue, pursue it with great vigilance. And I think there's nothing wrong in that, as long as you're paying attention to what's happening. Certainly from a policy standpoint, which is probably the worst thing you can do, is make a judgment call and not think about the implications um, that way.
I think Jason, what I would just add to what Brian is sharing is that I think there are three core things. One is that, and I'm stealing a little bit of what I've shared with the boards of like health systems. So how this could apply to payers, I think is hopefully will be obvious. But there are a lot of healthcare systems who think of doing an AI project in some cases, as well as payers, by the way, as checkbox. I'm checking this box so that I can tell folks, I'm doing something with AI. I think it needs to be a core part of the operating model in order for it to be successful long term. And it needs to be something that is woven into the strategic fabric of what the next 10-year plan, next 5-year plan is going to be. That's one element. The second element, and I think we've all alluded to it during this conversation, but I think the people that are going to lead in doing AI are those who are embracing the responsible aspects of AI, the transparency needed, the ethical use of AI as a core principle of how they're going to use it in their business. We all know examples of where it can go wrong. I think the third example, or the third area where I think it's going to be incredibly important, and Brian kind of alluded to it, don't be afraid of waiting for perfection before you do something. And then focus on continuous learning, because none of these AI systems are perfect. As long as we're able to have some patience to move them along, I think would be critical. Those are the three things I think that will separate out those who are dabbling from those who are leading from the front.
That's a great perspective. Um, I think there's a degree of genuine commitment versus, I guess, optical presentation of things. And um, some of that is independent of the type of organization or the size or scale of the organization, as well as and more about the alignment and clear lines of communication and clear commitment and backing that up with actions, not just words as well, if I'm to paraphrase.
I
Looking at
agree.
questions up.
Oh, if I could just chime in real quick, I just wanted to agree with everything that was said. Getting buy-in from your entire organization, vet appropriately, gain additional perspectives. Folks that use these solutions daily are not going to buy in if their leaders don't. Respond to, any issues with compliance or inefficiency, respond to those promptly, right? I think also folks that are implementing these types of programs are going to see, especially when it comes to regulatory changes and RAF scores, right? So, for example, AI can help with coding completeness. Coding completeness means more accurate results, fully capturing that member's burden of illness, not missing anything. So having these RAF scores that are accurate and complete, especially with, some of the changes we've seen with new coding models, we moved to V08 for ACA, we moved to V28 full implementation for MA. By implementing some of these solutions, you're going to see an uptick there, right? You'll be able to have those RAF scores that are accurate and complete. And one other thing I wanted to mention is using AI for suspect opportunities has been really helpful in bringing those potential illnesses that have not yet been documented to providers' attention compliantly, letting them be the clinical decision makers. But that can also help close gaps. And again, I know I'm a broken record here. By doing that can really help ensure that the member's burden of illness is fully captured.
Thank you. Oh, we've got a second question. So we had one question that came in which basically echoed my question around does scale matter? Will it be easier for larger payer to adopt AI changes or small payers to do the same? And I think we had addressed that a little bit in terms of teeing up the question. And I would just weigh in personally myself in my own experience. I work for a mid-size payer, and there are a lot of advantages to being small and nimble and aligned and having buy-in across the organization that may supersede some of the advantages of access to capital that a larger payer may bring. I think that we're seeing a lot of smaller payers actually in the marketplace now, and I worked at one that moved pretty aggressively in adopting technology. We've got a second question. We'll see if we have time here. Question is, how do you square the idea of experimentation and not expecting perfection with the need for anything in production being fully compliant?
Yeah, so
It
let
sure
me just
comes.
clarify my comment. I would just say that by no means do I mean that we should accept less than perfection when it comes to legal issues or compliance issues or things of that sort. I think what I'm referring to when we say perfection is somehow expecting that think about the MIT review study that showed that 95% of AI projects failed. They failed because we had unreasonable expectations in terms of the outcomes they were going to deliver. So the ROI and outcomes is what I was referring to. But I know Christy's got some comments on that as well.
No, I agree. I think it's important here when we talk about perfection is to separate, between compliance and regulatory guidance versus, ROI or other things. And that's why it's so important that we have humans involved in this process, right? So if an NLP, I keep using NLP because that's how I use AI in my day-to-day. The NLP serves up cancer. We need a human to tell the AI, whoa, 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 this is actually a history of cancer. This is not an HCC. This is not something that we're going to add to the member, right? So when that happens, we do expect perfection. But again, it's through that machine learning, that continual learning process where humans have that conversation with that AI engine to make sure that we maintain that compliance.
Thank you. In the interest of time, this has been a great discussion. I want to maybe just open it up for a 30-second closing statement from each of you, and then we'll wrap up the session for today. And I'll go kind of left to right on my screen. Anil, then Christy, then Brian, if you've got maybe a quick closing statement.
Yeah, look, I think I've kind of alluded to this, but I really believe that the future will not be defined by whether a payer adopts AI. I think a lot of payers are already adopting it, but how they use it responsibly and then how they strategically weave it into their plan. I think the most important thing is that when you start to integrate, whether it's traditional AI or agentic workflows, into the core operations that they do, they have to make sure that they focus on trust and transparency. Otherwise, they'll lose their members, they'll lose their constituents, they'll lose the employers along in the journey. Um, they have to be able to adapt with all the caveats that we mentioned earlier. And then finally, I think it's a journey. So we shouldn't think about this as a one-time project, evolving journey that is going to require continuous investment, continuous oversight, and occasionally when you have a long journey, you need partners and advisors along the way to help shape the future that you can see together. So that's what I would leave you with. And from the innovator point of view, if you ever want to know a little bit more about what we're doing, feel free to reach out. Christy?
Yeah. You said it perfectly. I don't have many builds there, but shameless plug, if you guys ever need a, coding shop, we also do consulting. So if you are kind of stuck in we don't know where to start, how to make sure that we're compliant, I'm your girl. Reach out to me, can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to help you out.
Yeah, just the close. I know we have a minute. I think Paul Markovich said it best with Blue Shield California. We need to stop monetizing the member, right? Um, we need to remember who we're serving. We're all affected by this industry. And so the more we can think about the downstream effects of our business to the member, to the employer, the entire supply chain the better we will be. And if we can stick to that and use technology to understand policy to make sure we don't get in trouble, do it. It's right there in front of us. Everybody has access to, the systems. Do it. But we need to remember that the money's not in the member. The money and the opportunity is in having population effects, which I think we can have an effect on, and nobody better to do it than folks in this group, in this panel, and those on the phone.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists. This has been a great discussion. Thank you to all of you that attended today. Please scan the QR code, schedule a call. We're happy to continue this conversation and go deeper. So thank you all so much and look forward to continuing this dialogue.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.